Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone out with us this evening. We're glad you're here. Whether you are visiting with us or are one of our regular members, we're thankful that you chose to be here with us this evening. This microphone is not wanting to cooperate. We're going to sing number 450, Nearer My God to Thee. We'll sing the first, third, and fourth verses of this, and then Justin will teach us here in the auditorium class. Nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me, still my song shall be. To Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. There let the way appear, steps unto heaven, all that Thou sendest me, and mercy give. Angels to beckon me, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee. Or if on joyful wing, cleaving the sky, sun, moon, and stars forgot, upward I fly. Still my song shall be, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer, my God, to Thee, nearer to Thee.
Good evening. I don't know. I should have already had this on. I'm sorry.
That's what the silence period is.
Yeah, you really threw me off. I'm standing in the back, and there's a 1 minute and 38 seconds left, and all of a sudden there's this big hush. And I was back there, and I was about to just step out and just scream, 90 seconds! But I bit my tongue. I could hear a few whispers, and so I let it go, and you did start talking a little bit, so that was good. I told Matt, he's like, I'm going to get up there. I was like, no, you have to wait till the clock strikes 0. Like, we have to retrain these people not to expect anything before there's zeros on the board, because, got to have that last few seconds, so. Are you ready? I can tell. All right. We'll be opening up to Genesis chapter 30. Genesis chapter 30 is what we're going to be looking at this evening for just a few moments. As we're making our way through the story of Jacob, we left off last week, and you know, Jacob is 550 miles from his home, right? He has left the land of Canaan, the promised land. He has journeyed northeast to the land of Haran, where he has met Laban, he has met Rachel, he has met Leah, and little did he know he went looking for one wife, and he's going to come back home with more than one wife due to the deceit and trickery of Laban. And as we talked about last week, we kind of looked at the domestic disaster, as you would call it, of Jacob, right? And then we traced his wives and his children, and kind of what that looks like for Jacob. And we left off last week, Jacob has 4 wives, Jacob has 11 sons, and Jacob has a daughter. And that's kind of we're going to pick up tonight. And tonight we have a lot to cover. So we're not probably going to read it all the way through verse by verse this evening, because we need to get from the middle of chapter 30 all the way through the end of chapter 31. And chapter 31 has 55 verses by itself. So we're going to break this down. I'm going to kind of tell you the story, and then we're going to go back and talk about it. But basically what's going to happen is Joseph is born. Jacob is finally going to go to Laban and say, okay, I've done my part. I have fulfilled my contract. I have worked 7 years for a wife that I wasn't expecting to get, and now 7 more years for the wife that I should have got the first 7 years. And it's time for me to go home. And eventually, Laban's going to work this deal with Jacob so that Jacob sticks around 6 more years. So it'll be 20 years before Jacob ever goes back to his homeland. And eventually, Jacob's going to have a dream. God's going to tell Jacob that, hey, it's time for you to pick up and go. And so Jacob is going to talk to Leah and Rachel and basically explain to them, hey, I've had this dream. It's time for us to go. And they're like, all right, what God says, we will do. And they pack their stuff up and kind of sneak off, I guess you'd say, away from Laban. Laban finds out. He chases down Jacob and his family, and basically comes to face to face with him and tells him, don't you know what I could do to you? Don't you know that what I have the power to do to you, how I could hurt you, how I can make life miserable for you? And then they're going to have this ordeal where he's going to search for some missing items from his house through Jacob's family's possessions. And eventually Jacob is going to berate Laban and basically tell Laban exactly who he is and what he thinks about him, which you probably should never do to your father-in-law, but that's enough time for another story, I guess, another lesson. And eventually they're going to kind of sort of make a peace treaty, so to speak. Not really a peace treaty as much as hey, as long as you don't cross this line and I don't cross that line, we won't kill each other. And that's kind of where the story leaves off. Laban rides off into the sunset, and history is written, and Jacob is going to basically fulfill the rest of the story for God's plan. So what I want to do tonight, now that's the story in a nutshell. What I want to do tonight, though, is I want to examine this chapter and a half, and I want us to look at Laban, because we've talked about Laban the last few weeks, but I want us to see basically who Laban really is, because I believe in this section of scriptures, we're going to learn a lot about this man Laban, right? This man who's Jacob's, well, he's Jacob's relative, right? Basically Jacob's uncle, Jacob's father-in-law, granddaddy to the children. But we're going to learn 5 different things about Laban in this passage that I think will be beneficial to us. So Genesis chapter 30 is where we're going to be. And we're going to start in verse number 25. And the first thing I want you to note, we note about Laban is Laban's an unbeliever. Okay, he's an unbeliever. You'll remember the family history of Abraham and his people. They were idolaters, at one point in time. And so Laban is not a believer. He does not serve Yahweh God. And so we get to Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given to you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." So as the story goes out, as Jacob goes and basically requests his release, I fulfilled my contract. Joseph has just been born. He's kind of stuck around because, Rachel at that point was still barren. And so now that she's had a wife, hey, it's time, or a wife. Well, that was what messed up. Now that she's had a son, it's time for us to leave, right? It's time for us to get out of here. And Laban comes, and Laban doesn't want to leave, right? And Laban says, well, I've learned something about you that basically my blessings have come through you because God has blessed me through you. But how does Laban come about that knowledge? What's he say? I learned it through what? Divination. Well, that's not something we talk a lot about, right? What's divination? Okay, kind of witchcraft. Soothsaying? Yeah. It's this idea of seeking knowledge for the unknown, or maybe things for the future through supernatural means, many times through witchcraft, sorcery, things of that nature. How did God feel about divination? Yeah, he said, no way, right? Back in Deuteronomy chapter 18, there's several passages, Deuteronomy 18 verses 19 and following there, where basically God says, hey, when you go into this land, you don't act like the people that you're going into their land. You don't do the things that they do, because one of the things they do is they practice divination. And you're not going to do that. My people are not going to do that because you serve me. What was the problem with, from God's perspective, why would God not want his people practicing divination? What is practicing divination? If I'm a so-called believer of God, but I practice divination, what does that say that I think about God?
He's not all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-doing.
Okay, he's not all-knowing, all-seeing, all-doing. Basically, I don't trust him, right? Okay, Philip?
Well, you can get into speculation here, but in the New Testament, divination was oftentimes powered by demonic forces. So the origin of divination was not holy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's caught up in the pagan worship, right? The idol worship, and that's what the people of the land did. So this is how Laban learns this knowledge, right? He says, I've learned it through divination. Now you skip forward and you get to chapter 31. And Jacob is now about to leave. He's about to get out of town with his wives. And as they're going to sneak away, we get in verse 17, the Bible says, Jacob arose, and Jacob set his sons and his wives on camels, and he drove away all his livestock and all his property that he had gained, the livestock and the possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. And Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel, stole her father's, what's it say? Yeah, household gods. Stole her father's idols, right? So Laban is an idol worshiper. He has these little figurines, we might call them, that represented deity. And a lot of times these were very sexual in nature and things of that nature. And so Rachel takes that. Now, why did the people have these little, what we might call these gods? They call them household gods, but they're these small figures. What was the purpose? Why do most people have gods? What do they do to? Okay, they pray to them. Okay, each has different kind of power, so we worship them, right? Worship what they can provide. But they're also, a lot of these household gods are what we might call of great value. Because a lot of them, the way they were made, some of them were made out of gold, things of that nature. So they would have been very valuable. A lot of times people looked at these household gods as if they represented headship in a family. So they were kind of passed down from generation to generation. And so, you think about this, why would Rachel take this household god, these household idols? Is Rachel struggling with idolatry? Well, I mean, perhaps. But it could also be that household god was of great value, and it would have been valuable to her and to Jacob. But it could also be that she was trying to take that to basically kind of imply that now Jacob is now the head of the family, that Jacob's going to be the one who is the leader of the family. So the picture that you have of Laban from the get-go is that here Laban is, and he's got these household gods. He's this unbeliever. Eventually you get to verse 30. Laban's going to catch up with Jacob and his family. And it says, now you have gone away because you've longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob answered and said, because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. And anyone with whom you find your God shall not live. Now, Jacob didn't realize what he was saying here. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have done that is yours, or what I have that is yours, and take it. But Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Rachel's tent, or to Leah's tent, Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the tent of her two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent, and he entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise up before you, for the way of the woman is upon me. No exegesis needed there, right? So he searched, but did not find the household god. So these gods were so important to Laban that Laban chases down Jacob, his family, and then he goes on this mad hunt and basically embarrasses Jacob, going through all of Jacob's possessions, going through all the wives' possessions, looking for these household gods because they were of great value to Laban. So that's the first thing. Laban's an unbeliever. Here's the second thing we know about Laban. Laban is a very selfish man. He's a very selfish man. Go back to chapter 30 for just a moment. And let's pick up in verse 28. He says, name your wages and I will give it to you. So Jacob says, you yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household? And he said, what shall I give you? So as Jacob goes to him and Jacob is wanting to leave, you begin to see the attitude of Laban, right? Laban doesn't want Jacob to leave for what reason? Yeah, because Jacob, because of you, I've been blessed, right? He's very selfish, right? My reason for not wanting you to leave, to not wanting you to go live your life, for you to go back home, is because if you stay here, I'm going to get more out of it, right? If you stay here, I'm going to be blessed, right? Because that's ultimately what happened. Jacob says, hey, when I came into town, you had very little. Now you have a lot because God has blessed you through me, right? And so you see this selfish nature of Laban to the point that Laban says, okay, what can I give you? What will it take to keep you? Now that's a familiar question, right? Because when Jacob first shows up on the scene, he first meets Laban, he stays with Laban a month, and Laban comes to him and Laban says, you shouldn't work for free. What do you want me to give to you? Now, the first time he asked that question back in Genesis chapter 29, he's asking that question because he wants to reward his relative for working. That's really what it's about. Now he's asking that question not because of his relative, but for himself. Basically, what can I give you that will keep you here so that I can keep growing my livestock, so that my empire can continue to grow, right? That's kind of the man he is, okay? So you fast forward to chapter 31. And Jacob is meeting with Rachel and Leah, and they're out in the field, and they're having this private conversation. And I want you to look at verse 14. As Jacob has told them, hey, we need to escape. It's time to go back home. You know, your father is not looking at me the same. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said, is there any portion of our inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Now that's a pretty powerful statement. I mean, that shows submission, right? That's godly submission. Wives submitting to the husband as the husband submits to the Lord. As God has said for you to do, let's do that. But why is it that they're so eager to do that? Why are they eager to get up and leave? Because remember, this is home for them. How do they view their father? Yeah. You know, Dad's stolen from us. Now, how has Dad stolen from them? Okay, maybe he spent their inheritance. Okay. What has Jacob done for the last 14 years? He's worked for them, right? He's worked, and basically by working, that was the exchange of the bridal price, right? That was the dowry, as it was called in that culture. So in their minds, and the way it was done in that culture, at least a portion of that dowry that was given, maybe even all that dowry that was given to pay for them, first off, they say, wait a minute, he sold us, right? He's treated us like property, number one. But number two, he's taken that money and he's spent it, and you know what he should have done with that money? He should have kept a portion back. He should have kept a portion back for us, because what they would do in that culture was that would be kept back in case something happened. Maybe the husband died. Maybe there was divorce or desertion or something like that took place. And so that money could be used for the women to care for themselves. But guess what? We don't have that anymore. Why? Because Dad spent it, right? So they're eager to leave because guess what? Laban's selfish. He's not just an unbeliever, but he's a selfish man. And here's the thing. It's not just about Jacob, being this way with Jacob. He's been this way with his own flesh and blood. And so they're like, okay, yeah, whatever God says, that we're going to do, right? So Laban's an unbeliever. Number two, Laban is selfish. Number three, Laban is a deceitful man. He's a deceitful man who's willing to connive and basically get his way. Go back to chapter 30. Chapter 30, beginning of verse 31, right? He says, what shall I give you? Jacob says, you shall not give me anything, right? Jacob does not want to enter into a contract with this guy any longer, right? He wants things to be different. Instead, he says, you will do this for me. I will again pasture your flock and keep it. That's what Laban's asking him to do. He says, let me pass through all of your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look to my wages, into my wages with you. Everyone that's not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted as stolen. And Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. So what's the deal that Jacob proposes here? Seems it's a really odd deal, really.
Distribution of the offspring.
Okay, he wants some of the offspring from the flock that he's tending to. Why would Jacob want some of the offspring of the flock that he's tending to? Payment? To make his own. What does Jacob not have at this point? Really anything, right? I mean, no herd or really nothing, right? He had to leave everything behind when he left home, and now he's come. He has two wives. He has these two maids, concubines, so to speak. He's got 11 sons. He has a daughter, and really he has nothing to say as his own. And he says, here's what I want to do. I want to build my own livelihood. I want to have my own flock and my stock. So here's what we're going to do. You know, any animal that is born that's spotted or speckled or striped, basically we would say any animal that's born into the flock that's abnormal. He says, you give me that. Now, why would he ask for the abnormal ones? I mean, why not just say, give me half of the flock? Do what? Okay, maybe easy to identify. Easy to identify?
Maybe he thought you were willing to give it up.
Yeah, I think maybe it's more along those lines. He knows who he's dealing with. And Laban's not just going to go, okay, I'll give you whatever you want. Right? Laban at this point, he's already deceived him, right? He's already tricked him into marrying Leah. That wasn't a part of the plan, even though we agreed on Rachel, right? So I know who I'm dealing with. So if I go to him and try to work this plan that's really beneficial for me and maybe not so much for him, or maybe it's like 50-50, he's going to say, no way, that's not happening. So Jacob proposes this deal that's basically too good to pass up, right? I'll take the abnormal ones because most of the time in a flock like that, less than 20% would come out abnormal like this. So basically what Jacob is asking for, and shepherds in that day would get more than that on commission. So basically Jacob's asking, you pay me less than what I should be getting to shepherd your flock to begin with. And Laban says, okay, you got it. Why would Laban agree to that? Because Laban knows that's a really good deal, right? I'm going to come out ahead, and this poor foolish boy just doesn't get it, right? He just doesn't know, right? So verse 35. That day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled, and every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, he put them in charge of his sons. And he set the distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So that day after they make this agreement, he goes out and basically takes all the ones that are abnormal, and what's he do? He separates them, right? And not just separates them, he puts them in the charge of his son, and he says, get a 3 days' journey out of here. Why does he do that? What?
He has a plan.
Laban has a plan?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Dan. I was thinking
Yeah, Laban's the one who does it. So why does Laban do this? Okay, he's selfish. Okay, keep his flock pure, right? We eliminate a starter herd, right, for Jacob's flock. Not only that, but once we start having these animals, right, if they get mixed in, well, all of a sudden they're identified as Jacob's. So let's move these as far away as possible so there's no mistaking who these belongs to. And the only thing Jacob's left with are the pure animals. So Jacob's starting from scratch, right? Now, little does Laban know that God is in on this, right? That God's gonna bless him. But he's conspiring, right? To get his way for things to work out to his advantage. So verse 37 says, then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and he peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of sticks. He then set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering place where the flocks would come to drink, since they would bred when they came to drink. And the flocks bred in front of the sticks, so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs, and he set the faces of the flock toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. And whenever the stronger of the flock was breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in before the flock so that they could see them, so that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay with them, or not lay them there, so that the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Okay, now this is where it gets weird, right? Because you got Jacob, and he's basically doing all these different things. Basically what Jacob's doing, it's believed, is basically, this is kind of like the folks' tale of the day. You know, that if you want your animals to be striped, then you take a branch and you strip it down so that the bark's exposed. You throw it in the water trough. When they come, that's typically where they would mate. They would see that, and then that would cause them to conceive animals that were striped, spotted, and speckled, and so forth, right? And so in Jacob's mind, Jacob is trying to help himself out here, right? If I do this, then maybe I can produce some animals like this, and I can grow my flock and herd. Now you think, now that sounds weird to us, right? Like we would never do something like that, right? No, that wouldn't happen in our culture. That's in that culture. Let me tell you, people today have some really weird ideas about what you do to conceive either a boy or a girl. Okay? Like supposedly, you go to the internet, if you want to have a boy, then the mom-to-be should eat red meat and snack on salty food. And the dad should drink soda. And you should try to conceive under a quarter moon on odd days. Okay, that's kind of weird. If you want a girl, then you should stick to mostly a fish and vegetable type diet, very healthy type diet. And you should place a wooden spoon and scissors under your bed when you conceive. Now, see, they're not so weird after all, right? They believe in things that people today believe in, right? We do weird things. And so here Jacob is, and for whatever reason, Jacob is taking what's believed to work in that day and time and basically, trying to help himself out. Obviously breeding the stronger with the stronger to help himself out. But verse 43 basically lets us know what happens. It says, thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks and female servants and male servants and camels and donkeys. Basically, it didn't matter what Jacob did. Because as you're going to find out when you get to chapter 31 there, we don't have time to read them, but verses 14 through 13, what you find out there is as Jacob is doing all this, it's really God doing all this. In fact, over and over throughout this process, these 6 years, Laban's going to change the wages. He's going to change things. And Jacob says, 10 times your dad has changed wages with me. And every time he did that, whatever he changed it to, that's what produced. God continually blessed Jacob because he said, I see your affliction. I see what Laban has done to you, right? So Laban is an unbeliever. Laban is a selfish man. Laban is a deceitful man. Number 4, Laban is a vengeful man. He's a vengeful man. As you open up to chapter 31, Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all of our fathers, that is our fathers, and from what is our fathers, he's gained all of his wealth. Jacob hears what Laban's sons are saying. Basically, they're accusing Jacob of basically stealing from their father. Basically, he's taken our inheritance. That's what they're worried about. And Jacob saw, notice, that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. So all of a sudden, Laban is looking at Jacob differently. Why? Yeah, because God is blessing Jacob, right? Jacob's the one who's all of a sudden being blessed, and it's not going so well for Laban. So verse 3 says, the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was. He wanted to talk to them privately, obviously. And he said, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that I have served your father with all of my strength. So Jacob realizes all of a sudden things are getting a little interesting at home. Laban, all of a sudden, he's not looking at me the same. He doesn't see me the same way. Probably, maybe doesn't treat him the same way. And not only that, but his sons over here, guess what? They're jealous of me, right? They're jealous of what's going on. And when people get jealous, what do people do? Stupid things, crazy things, right? And Jacob understands that. And God comes to Jacob and says, Jacob, it's time for you to return home. It's time for you to go back to the land that was promised. And so Jacob is going to set out. Now skip down to verse 22. It says, when it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him. He pursued him for 7 days, and he followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night, and he said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So as Jacob flees, Laban gets word. Laban goes to chase him down. And I don't think this was to go chase him down to say parting words. It's been fun. I wish you the best of luck. I don't think that's what's going on. Because God comes to Laban and says, you better not say anything bad to him. Or you better not do anything bad to him. That's really what God's telling him. Don't lay a finger on Jacob. Now here's a thought for a minute. Why didn't God just tell Laban, go back home? Go back home. I have blessed Jacob. You're not going to do anything to him. Just turn around and go home. Because that's not what he says. He says, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. In other words, you can go talk to him. Why not send him back home? Look at verse 31 for a minute. Laban gets to him and says, you've gone greatly longing for your father's house. Why did you steal my gods? Jacob said, because I was afraid, for I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. I didn't think you'd let me leave. I didn't think let your daughters leave, my wives. I didn't think you'd let your grandchildren leave, my sons, my daughter, right? I didn't trust you. I was fearful of you. Why would God tell Laban, or not tell Laban to go back home, but rather allow him to go and speak to Jacob? Say it again.
Jacob would know he's not after.
Okay, Jacob would know he's not after him. Years earlier, when Jacob is on his way to Haran and he has that vision, what does God promise him? The land, prosperity, children, and one more thing. Yeah, protection, right? I will be with you. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. So maybe part of the reason that God doesn't tell Laban, hey, Laban, go back home. It's over. Maybe it's because God wants Jacob to see Laban. Because maybe God wants Jacob to know, I'm protecting you. Because he goes and you look down at verse 29, he says, is it not in my power to do to you harm? But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Say, is it not in my power to do to you whatever I want to? But I can't do that. Why? Because your God is protecting you. Because your God is taking care of you, right? So Laban is an unbeliever. Laban is a selfish man. He's a deceitful man. He's a vengeful man. And then the fifth thing is Laban's a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite. Look down at verse 36. Laban has caught up to Jacob. He has searched through all their tents looking for his household gods. And you get to verse 36. And the Bible says, then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. That word berated there in the Hebrew, it means to make a case against. It's basically a court term. And so basically Jacob is about to make his case against Laban, right? I'm about to tell you who you are and what you've done. Jacob said to Laban, what is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you felt through all my goods, and what have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These, what's it say? 20 years I've been with you. So Jacob works 14 years for his 2 wives and 6 years for his flock. These 20 years I've been with you. Nothing has happened to your goats. There's been no miscarriage. I have not eaten of the rams of your flock. Whatever was torn by wild beasts, I did not bring to you. I bore the loss myself. See, in that day and time, the shepherd wasn't responsible. If a lion or something would come in and destroy the flock, they wouldn't be responsible for that. They wouldn't have to pay restitution for that, only if it was stolen or lost on their part, but not because of wild animals. He said, but when a wild animal came, guess what? I bore the responsibility for that. From my hand you required it, whether it was stolen by day or stolen by night. I was there by day, and the heat consumed me, and the cold by night. My sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I've been in your house. I have served 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you've changed my wages 10 times. And if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the father of fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and he rebuked you last night. Jacob's starting to get it. He's starting to understand God and God's playing a part in his life. So Laban answered, these daughters are my daughters. The children are my children. The flock are my flocks. All that you have is mine. But what can I do to you this day for these daughters or for the children whom they born? See, Laban's still struggling here, right? Because Laban says, everything that you have, that's mine. That flock, it's mine. Those children, they're mine. Those wives, they're mine. Right? Verse 44. Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and he set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. And they took the stones and they made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Jer-Gasagath, or something with a J, we'll say. And Jacob called it Gilead, or Gilead. It's interesting. And Laban uses an Aramaic term, and Jacob uses a Hebrew term. And Laban says, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore, he named it Gilead. And Mitzvah, for he said, the Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. Then you get to verse 50. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. You see what Laban says to Jacob? What's he telling Jacob not to do? Don't take any more. Don't be a polygamist. Why does Jacob have multiple wives? Because of Laban, right? Don't take any more wives. I only have this many because of you, right? Because of your trickery, because of your deceit, right? So Laban said to Jacob, see this heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. And the God of Abraham, that's Jacob's God, and the God of Nahor, the God of their fathers, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and he offered a sacrifice in the hill country. He called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. And early in the morning, Laban arose, kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. So you think about this story, and you think about what has happened here in this picture that is painted, because this is like 3 chapters, going in here where we're seeing Laban and we're seeing Jacob, and we're kind of seeing, Jacob the deceiver, and all of a sudden Jacob has been basically out-Jacobed by another deceiver, right, who's more cunning and more deceitful than even he is. And here's the question I want us to close with tonight. When you think about Jacob, Jacob needed to get away from Laban. He needed to break away. He needed to free up. He needed to go back home. Is there a Laban in your life? Is there somebody in your life that you need to break away from? Is there somebody in your life that you being around them is not good for you? Unbelievers, people who pull you down, people who they're not helping you get to heaven, they're hurting you, right? Are there people around you who are selfish, who they're not concerned about you, they're only concerned about themselves? Are there people around you who's deceitful, who connive to get what they want all the time because, again, they don't have your best interest at heart. They just want to hurt you. Are there people around you like that? Are there people around you who are hypocrites, right? Who say one thing, profess one thing, but do another? You see, I think the answer to that, to each of those, is yes. I know people in my life who fit all these categories, and yet sometimes we want to surround ourselves with these people. I know I should break away. I know I should not spend so much time around that person because they're not a good influence on me, but I've known them for a really long time. We've been friends since we were in grade school. Now listen, Jacob was around Laban for a long time. But there came a point when Jacob understood and God said, hey, Jacob, it's time for you to break away. It's time for you to go back home to the place where you belong. It's time for you to be around the people that you're supposed to be around, right? And the same thing can be said for us. There comes a point in time where we have to break off certain relationships. And I know the older we get, we think that's probably more for, that's for teenagers. That's for the young people. But no, it's for us too. Because a lot of us find ourselves in those situations where sometimes there's people we need to break off from. The old saying, 1 Corinthians 15:33, bad company corrupts good morals. You hang around somebody who uses bad language, you know what's going to happen? Oh, I'm going to convert them. Well, you might. But they might convert you because you might start talking like them. You hang around somebody who has, a different values. Listen, I'm going to convert them. You might. But they might bring you down as well, right? Sometimes we have to break away. And that's where Jacob was. And so Jacob's story is, moving forward, Jacob is going to break away from Laban. Jacob is about to have an encounter with God that's going to completely transform his life and his future, and eventually be reunited with his brother, who, remember, is out to kill him, right? He wants to kill him. But we'll stop there. We won't go any further. So any thoughts or comments as we close?